Well, I had sort of an unusual entry point. I don't have a medical background at all. I'm trained as an evolutionary biologist, and all of my research experience had been in evolutionary biology and ecology. But I was interested in how populations evolve, including populations of cells. A lot of the experiments that, evolution is hard to watch. The evolution of life on Earth is hard to study because it takes millions of years. It's all a population of cells evolving in the lab, and we can do that in real time, more or less, and watch how populations evolve, how they adapt to fit their environment. In some cases, they also change their own environment through the things they do. So they're changing their environment and they're adapting to fit their environment. This creates all kinds of complexities and makes interesting challenges for evolutionary theory. So I was interested in problems like that. And it came to my attention that other people were talking about the fact that in cancer, there's actually a population of cells inside the human body. These cells are doing all the things that evolving populations do. Some survive, others don't. Some reproduce, others don't, depending on how well they fit their environment. The ones who reproduce pass on their progeny to new cells, not to new people, but to new cells. So this is a population of cells evolving inside one person during that person's lifetime. And I said, well, that's really interesting. I know about evolutionary theory. I can bring my theory to bear on this and help push this along towards being a real theory of cancer. It might actually be useful. So that's how I got involved. That's a good question. I could talk about a long time because it does go to the heart of why we have a new cancer mentality. And you'll get a lot of different kinds of answers to that question. When the trend in medicine is to take a very molecular perspective, to focus on the molecules. When you do that with cancer, what started out being considered one disease first becomes many and then more, because anytime you look for molecular differences, you'll find them. If you and I are both cancer patients, there's a evolutionary process going on in a population of cells in my body, a different evolutionary population in your body, each driven by random mutations. There's no reason to expect exactly the same mutation events in either of us and each of us. So there will be molecular differences. And the more molecular differences you look for, as our technology gets better and better, the more we'll find. So cancer has gone, it's hard to keep up with the estimates. Some of the textbooks say, oh, cancer is a family of 100 diseases, but then other people say 200, 300, 400, and I think the sky's the limit. If you look hard enough and long enough, you can find molecular differences between any two cancer patients. So ultimately, the result of that might be that how many diseases is the number of patients. That's sort of the logical extreme of that approach. Well, that is one direction that people sometimes take this. They say, okay, each patient has their own unique disease, and we need to characterize that disease and treat it as a completely unique disease we've never seen before. We could do that, but I don't think that's a good idea because cancer, there are good reasons for looking at cancer as one disease or one syndrome. And the reasons for that is that if we don't focus on the individual molecules, but if we focus on the process that's causing the problem, it is the same process in every single patient, which you already named. It's somatic evolution. So if we were to disregard that, we'd be throwing away a great deal of valuable information. So if we just said, oh, here's a person with cancer, it's a new disease we've never seen before, that would be true at the molecular level, but it would not be true at the level of what is the process that's causing problem, how will this process respond to various different kinds of intervention? The answer to that is it's the kind of process that we always see in cancer. It will respond the way cancer always responds, in broad strokes, not in molecular detail, but in broad strokes. So, for example, if we treat it with something to kill the cancer cells, we know what will happen. The same thing that always happens in cancer, which is that we kill off the sensitive cells, leave behind the resistant cells. We see very rapidly the evolution of drug resistance in that cancer. So the tumor, when it's treated with a cytotoxin, like chemotherapy, the tumor will shrink, and then it will later grow back in a drug-resistant form that we can no longer treat successfully with that same drug. So we know a lot about what works, what doesn't work, and why, because we know about the dynamics and the processes that go on in cancer. And we would lose all that if we couldn't say, oh, it is cancer. We know something about cancer. So the middle ground is to say this cancer will have molecular differences from other cancers, but it will be cancerable. It will be driven by the same underlying dynamics of cells dividing, undergoing Darwinian selection. It will be undergoing somatic evolution. So I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say there's no such thing as cancer. There's just a completely unique condition in each patient. I think that would not be the best strategy. I wouldn't go quite that far. I would agree that it's been really frustrating that progress has been so very slow. Whether you're looking at the amount of money we've thrown at the problem, whether you're looking at the number of lives that have been ruined or lost, it's just really frustrating. Because when the war on cancer was declared, cancer was one of 5 biggest killers in the U.S. All the other 4 we've made enormous progress against. Cancer we have not. We didn't declare a war on heart disease, but deaths by heart disease are down by more than half. We didn't declare a war on infectious disease, but deaths from infectious disease are down by more than half. And so on through a list of several others. So in that sense, it's very frustrating. But to anybody who's been cured by cancer, cured from cancer, some people have, they're not going to agree with that statement. Their family's not going to agree with that statement. I'm so glad you asked me that question because that's been one topic of my own research. And to answer that, I go back to this idea of cancer as a evolving population of cells. Because of my background in ecology, I know that a lot of species in nature have traits where they basically use up their available resources, and then the population will either go extinct or move on. It can't stay put because if it's a predator, it's eaten all the prey. If it's a parasite, perhaps it's killed its host. And that's the end of the line for it evolutionarily. It's going to never be seen on Earth again unless it can move on. Anything that's gobbling up the resources it depends on for its livelihood very rapidly has to move on to survive. And it turns out the cancer cells gobble up the resources they depend on very rapidly. They have an elevated metabolic rate, so they're burning through their nutrients and oxygen very fast, and they're creating a depleted zone around themselves in which they're going to suffocate and starve if they sit still. So some cancer cells do sit still. They do suffocate and starve. Other cancer cells, just because of random genetic differences, don't sit still. They're able to move. They have motility. They can move out away from this little depleted dead zone into the surrounding normal tissue where there's still nutrients, there's still oxygen. Those cells survive. They divide and pass on their traits, including the trait of being able to move. Whatever molecular basis for it was, it's coded by that cell's DNA and is passed on to its daughter cells when it divides. So this is a Darwinian process where only the cells that have motility survive. After a period of time, all the cells that are still alive are cells that have motility. They're able to move, and they're able to break down barriers in their way that would stop them from. The result of this is cancer invasion. And actually, this is what makes cancer cancer. A benign growth is cells that are growing fast, but they're staying put. They can create a nuisance in various ways, but they don't usually kill people. However, what kills people is these cells start invading the surrounding normal tissues. And in order to do that, they have to do a lot of damage too. So they secrete enzymes that can digest proteins and normal structures of the body so they can sort of tear their way through a tissue or an organ and spread through that organ. When they reach a blood vessel, they can penetrate the blood vessel, be carried by the bloodstream to a new site in the body. That's metastasis. And these characteristics of tissue invasion and metastasis are what make a cancer malign, what make it life-threatening. We talk a lot about cell proliferation, but cell proliferation isn't what kills you, but it does create the selective pressures that mean that the only cells that survive are the cells that are malign. So this is an example of cells modifying their environment in a way that creates new selective pressures on themselves. So they're driving their own evolution because they're dividing so rapidly, they're outgrowing their resources. They then drive their own evolution towards motility, invasion, towards malignancy. And that apparently is why benign growths tend, not always, but most of the time, they tend to develop into malignant cancers. That's an excellent question, and of course there are people working on that question. There's been a little bit, in my view, a little bit of a single-minded focus on killing cancer cells. And part of this is carried over from infectious disease. If you've got malaria, if you've got cholera, if you've got what have you, staphylococcus infection, the solution is to kill those cells that are making the patient sick. Once those cells are killed, the problem is solved. So we tend to carry that over into cancer and have a very single-minded focus on it. We need better ways to kill cancer cells. When we do that, we're exerting a selective pressure. We're selecting out the cells that can be killed by that drug, leaving behind the cells that are resistant to it. And as I mentioned before, those approaches work temporarily. It's easy to get a patient, relatively easy, to get a patient into remission where their tumor has shrunk and you've bought some time. But those patients all too often don't recover fully and don't survive because the cancer is this dynamic evolutionary process that we have not changed the fundamentals of. So killing cancer cells doesn't work as well as killing infectious disease cells does for a number of reasons. And we do need to look at other approaches. Preventing this cell motility and tissue invasion, I think, is more promising and deserves more attention. Well, it's important to the cells because the cells who don't find new resources die. First off, they run out of oxygen. That's the first challenge. They can solve that problem by shifting their metabolism into a mode where they don't require oxygen. Cells normally require oxygen. That's why we require oxygen, because all our cells do. They use oxygen to burn their fuel to produce energy. But there is a different kind of metabolism called anaerobic or fermentative metabolism, where cells don't require oxygen. That's much less efficient. So that's one way that tumors typically solve the problem of oxygen shortage. They switch to this fermentative metabolism. They can get energy in from nutrients without having oxygen. but it's much less efficient. So the next challenge is they're running out of nutrients. And again, they're consuming this limiting resource more rapidly than it's being provided by the circulatory system. The cells that stay put die. The cells that acquire genetic changes allow them to move are the only ones that survive and reproduce. The population of cells evolves toward motility and tissue invasion and all these things that kill people. Okay, well, the big two are oxygen and glucose, which is the main fuel. Cancer cells can get other fuel sources by destroying neighboring normal cells and basically eating them. And this is the other thing that tends to kill people when all these cells are both invading your tissues and organs and consuming them as, as a source of nutrition. That's not good for the function of that organ. Some of the other things that cancer cells need are various kinds of growth factors and, in some cases, hormones. If it's a hormone-sensitive type of cell, the type of cell that normally divides only when it receives a message from a hormone, that will be a limiting factor. There are others that are sort of special cases, but the most generally important ones for solid tumors are oxygen and glucose. Well, in fact, we start out that way. We start out with everything perfectly balanced. The human body, when it's healthy, looks beautifully designed, whether you believe it was designed by a god, a space alien, or Darwinian evolution. It clearly is very well designed somehow. Most scientists go for Darwinian evolution, of course, but not all doctors do. So part of that design is that every tissue is completely embedded throughout it is this network of blood vessels and microscopic capillaries that are constantly supplying oxygen and nutrients. And it turns out that the cells living in this capillary bed are consuming oxygen and glucose at the same rate they're provided, so the system is in equilibrium. That equilibrium is disturbed when the cells start to proliferate out of control, start to elevate their metabolic rate, divide more rapidly. As soon as you have a mass of cells that has just arisen by proliferating rapidly, a tumor or even a microtumor, any kind of mass, it's not all laced through with capillaries. It's going to be suffocating itself. It does not have access to the resources it needs. So we start out with a perfect balance, and that balance is disrupted by cell proliferation, which is usually the first stage of this whole process towards cancer. Well, I'm an oddball in cancer research for another reason, which is that I don't do my research in the laboratory, because I work mainly by trying to bring to the table what I know about and what's been developed by people studying evolution, people studying ecology. It turns out that cancer cells have an ecology. They have an environment that affects them, that they affect, and this is what ecologists study. And ecologists study how the interactions of organisms with their environment create selective pressures and drive evolution. So I try to bring these ideas into the context of cancer and get conceptual advances so that I don't go to the lab then and do the nitty-gritty hands-on work, but I can say to the people who do, I think you might try this. If the theory is correct, this kind of drug will lose effectiveness within a few weeks. This kind of drug will not. Try it and see. And then I just hope that somebody out there is listening and the ideas do get tried and do turn out to be useful. Yeah, anybody who's got the necessary background and time. It's something that's accessible, certainly at the level of graduate students. And I've supervised graduate students who have done computer modeling of these dynamics, these evolutionary dynamics in cancer, without a lot of specialized software or specialized programming background, because it's well, I think that's enough of an answer. I was going to go off on a long tangent that I'll cut off right there. Well, I work currently in cancer prevention, and that's definitely my personal bias. I think that the future of cancer medicine, the future of real progress in cancer medicine, will be in prevention. The future of profits will always be in treatment, but if we're concerned with saving lives, preventing suffering, the future is not in treatment, it's in prevention. It would be sort of like we could look and see that a lot of people are dying in car accidents. Oh well, we need better treatment for car accidents. We need to understand when people die in a car accident, what's happening at the molecular level, what kind of new drugs can we develop. You could do that, but it would be a lot more effective to prevent car accidents. Because of its dynamic, adaptive nature, cancer is just really hard to cure, especially once it's full-blown. Once cells are spreading through the body, metastasizing, it's a very tricky game of trying to kill the bad cells at least a little bit faster than you kill the good cells. So sometimes by the end of the game, it's hard to tell whether the patient died of the cancer or the treatment. It's a very rough sport, and it's really better avoided. We're getting some new clues about how, and of course I'm focusing on what we can learn from the evolutionary angle. How can we avoid the whole process from starting in the first place? Then nobody has to suffer from cancer. Hopefully nobody has to suffer from cancer treatment, which is also pretty unpleasant in some cases. So that's the future I see, is better cancer prevention. Well, it's an extremely valuable tool. It's obviously here to stay. I think it's, I've pretty much given you an idea that I don't think that's going to be the be-all and end-all, because there's a almost unlimited number of molecules that are involved in cells, and including cancer cells. The problem is not that the wrong molecules are there. All the molecules that you find in the cancer cells are the same molecules you find in an ordinary cell. That's one of the problems, one of the reasons cancer is so much more difficult than infectious disease. In infectious disease, there are alien molecules that can be targeted and destroyed and solve the problem. It's not the case in cancer. There's no alien molecule.